morning. Welcome back to the broadcast Retirement Network. This is BRN AM for Monday, December 4th, 2023. Our top story today, the decline in local news outlets is accelerating. And joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Tim Franklin is with the Northwestern University Medill School of Journalism. Tim, it's always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Tim, I want to start with, the headline of our show was decline in local news and outlets is accelerating. And I have to tell you, as somebody who is a long-term consumer of and purveyor of local news and national news, this is deeply concerning.
It is deeply concerning. And just to run some of the numbers past you that we found in our state and local news report, which we issued earlier this month, there are now 204 entire counties in the U.S. with no source of local news, no newspaper, no digital site, no public radio, no ethnic media. That's about 3 million Americans. Then on top of that, you've got more than 1,500 counties where there's only one news source. That's about 52 million Americans. So you combine those two numbers and you've got basically 55 million Americans with either no local news source or very limited access to local news. And this is something that I think has big implications for our democracy, for our society, for how we view one another. And I'd be happy to go into kind of some of what the research shows.
Yeah, let's talk a little about that, because I'll just give you my perspective. And I'm not a journalist, and I never went to journalism school. I'm just a host, and a retirement expert. But I like to get multiple sources of information when I'm looking at a particular issue. And when it relates to retirement or savings or finance, I want to have multiple issues. If I can, and those sources oftentimes are national sources, international sources, but also local sources, because good things come from all different places. So to me, if I'm the audience and I'm trying to frame together an issue, just hearing it from one source, a national source, which has maybe a little bit different agenda in terms of they want to get clicks, they want advertisers, it concerns me.
Well, and me too. And so let's think about this. So you've got these tens of millions of Americans with either no local news or very limited local news. So what do they do when they don't have a local news source? Well, I think they do a couple of things. One is they turn to Facebook groups or Nextdoor or a social media platform. And look, I think it's great that people are being civically active on Facebook and they want to know what's happening in their community. But there's a problem with that. And the problem is that there's no professionally trained journalist who's moderating that conversation, or who's fact-checking or checking documents or interviewing sources or checking clips, who's doing a lot of the basic things that journalists do to make sure that accurate, reliable, credible news is getting out to local communities. So the result of that is there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that gets spread through social media on these sites. And I think that this is contributing to the problem we have across the country with misinformation and disinformation that's kind of spreading like a cancer across the country. So, this is a big problem, I think, in many ways. And it's also contributing to kind of the hyper-partisanship that we're seeing in the country. So I think the other thing people do is they turn to national news sources. And news has been nationalized in a lot of ways. And that means turning to cable news sites on the right or the left. And you end up in this ideological filter bubble where your own personal belief sets are reinforced, as opposed to, like you were just saying in your case, you get multiple sources of information, which is great. But unfortunately, a lot of folks aren't doing that. So they just end up in this cocoon of news and information. And there's now research that shows that when there's no local news, and this is research by other universities, not Northwestern, that government spending goes up, that government corruption rises, that civic participation declines because people don't know about candidates in local elections or the details of local elections. And, we're in a crisis with local news, and it's not a red crisis or a blue crisis. It's a crisis. The news deserts are all over the country in Democratic areas, Republican areas, it doesn't matter. This is not a partisan issue. This is a serious problem.
Let's talk about one more question, then we'll go to a commercial break, because this is absolutely fascinating, especially for someone. I curate the news every day in our daily newsletter by hand, so there's no AI, there's no algorithm. But how did we get here? Is it purely economics, that the economics of the internet from 1995, when it was kind of more proliferated, really has eliminated the model? The model just didn't work, and so that creates these deserts. Where did this all start?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. The business model for local news has collapsed. It's imploded. And it's imploded for a couple of reasons. One is that audience preferences have shifted from print to digital news sources, smartphones, laptops, desktops, whatever. And so fewer people are buying print newspapers these days. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that digital advertising revenue has shifted to social media platforms and to search. And by some estimates, about 2/3 or even 3/4 of all the new digital ad revenue goes to three companies, Meta, Google, and Amazon. So there's just not much left for local news organizations to sponge up to support local journalism. And, it's a big structural problem. About 10 years ago, 80% of all the revenue for local news organizations came from advertising. Now, about more than half of the revenue comes from readers through subscriptions, digital subscriptions, memberships, and that sort. But advertising for local news has just completely collapsed, and not completely, but largely. And so that's the big part of the problem here.
Yeah, Tim, as I said, I need to take a very quick break. Can't get it out. We come back, we'll talk more about the de-evolution. I'm going to call it the de-evolution of local news. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. This morning we're talking to Tim Franklin of the Northwestern University Medill School of Journalism. Tim, thanks so much for staying with us. Really appreciate you hanging around for segment number 2 this morning.
Sure. Great to be with you.
Yeah, this is a fun, it's a concerning conversation, but it's certainly a fun conversation. Where do people get their news? And you mentioned people are, sorry, that's my phone. I just got a text alert on an article. But people use their phones, they use these devices, and they're just kind of scrolling through. Is there a fix for this? And you look at what's happened to cable and general TV, you've got streaming. And streaming has just blown up significantly. People are buying Hulu and YouTube TV and Netflix. Is there a solution to get back to eliminate these or change these arid deserts for local news?
Yeah, you know, there is no magic bullet to this problem, I don't think, but I'm a little more encouraged now than I have been in the past, based on some things that are happening. First of all, we are seeing some local news organizations that, by their own entrepreneurship and innovation, are making this transformation from print to digital. And they're growing digital subscriptions, they're diversifying their revenue streams. And they're making that switch to a new business model that really needs to happen. So I think, you know, some news organizations are figuring this out and are figuring out a new model, although by no means all. Then there are a couple of other things. One is philanthropy is stepping up in a big way. So the MacArthur Foundation, based here in Chicago, where Northwestern is based, announced a $500 million influx of philanthropic dollars for local news over the next 5 years. The Knight Foundation and some of the other big foundations are also involved in this because they recognize the stakes for democracy of not having access to local news and information. So we're going to see this kind of flood of foundation dollars coming into local news over the course of the next 5 years. I think that's great. It's not going to fix the problem. I think it may provide some runway for local news organizations to figure out a new business model over the course of these next 5 years. And then the other thing, and this is a bit controversial in some areas, but we're beginning to see public policy step in to try to help local news. There now are about a dozen states that have either passed legislation or are considering legislation to help local news. Things like advertising set-asides on ads that the government was going to buy anyway. They're now directing those to local news, or tax credits or incentives for small businesses to advertise in local news, or tax credits for people to subscribe to local news organizations. And there are other proposals that are out there. But we're beginning to see public policymakers who now, I think, have a real understanding of the extent of this problem to try to step in. There's a bipartisan bill pending in Congress that would also provide some tax incentives to try to help local news. So I think we are beginning to see some movement on this front. But, you know, whether how many states get involved in this or whether Congress actually passes something, I think is still to be seen.
What about consumers? Do they have a role to play here? I know you mentioned the public policy, and certainly there's always the local, state, federal policymakers kind of get involved. But the consumer has to, in my mind, want local news. And are they just not wanting it? I mean, I like to know. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I grew up in Baltimore. I like to know what's happening with the Orioles. I like to know what's happening in my hometown, even though I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and had lived in New York. So does the consumer bear some responsibility here in terms of shutting down some of these local or creating these small business deserts?
And by the way, I was editor of the Baltimore Sun, so we share that in common.
Okay, well, go Ravens. Look, I remember when the Colts played in Baltimore, and I'm still very sad about about that. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So from the consumer perspective, I guess I'd say a couple things. I don't think we have a demand problem. I think we have a supply problem. And so we saw during the pandemic, there was this huge growth in digital subscriptions and in readership of local news sites because people needed to know what was happening with infection rates in their community, or what was going on at the local hospital, or were the schools open or closed or Zooming, or what was happening with the local businesses. There was this rush to credible local news and information during the pandemic, and many, but by no means all of those subscribers have stuck around with local news. But here's the consumer problem, I think, and I don't blame consumers for this at all. Is that the news industry kind of conditioned folks to think that news was going to be free, because when the internet really took off in the late 90s, news organizations made it available for free, and you built this habit of news being free, and now they're trying to pivot back to paid news and information because journalism costs money. So part of it is a problem of their own creation. In the case of news organizations. And then I think we're also seeing subscriber fatigue, right? I mean, people have Netflix and Hulu and Paramount Plus and Disney, and they have all of these various subscription options out there now, and so tacking on a local news subscription is yet kind of another monthly fee. But the best thing for local news right now is for people to subscribe to their local news organization, so that those dollars can help support the news that they need to be informed and live their lives.
Tim, last question. I want to ask you about artificial intelligence, because you can't go a moment without reading something about AI. We just had what happened with OpenAI recently with the CEO. And so that, is AI a threat, or is it actually an ally for some of these local sites, these local television stations? Can they deploy AI? If you can't hire enough reporters, can you use AI to help source stories or kind of compete with the big boys and girls?
It's a good question. I actually, just a couple of weeks ago with one of my colleagues, we organized a workshop with leading experts around the world about the impact of AI on local news. And I would say, first of all, that anybody who says they know what the impact is going to be has a bridge for sale in New Jersey that they want to sell you. Look, AI is a tool, and it's going to be a powerful tool. I think it was Bill Gates who said this is going to be the most important invention since the internet itself. And so AI can help make local news organizations more efficient in some ways, certainly on the business side and the advertising side. And AI also will be able to generate stories and generate articles and content for local news sites. But here's the rub, is right now we're basically in the first inning of this whole AI revolution, and it's not there yet at the point of being able to provide reliable news and information. So there have been a couple of prominent examples around the country of news outlets that used AI, and that AI introduced errors into stories and into content that they then had to go back and correct. So, and that has a direct bearing on your credibility as a news organization. Yeah. I think this is going to revolutionize things. I think it's going to have a huge impact. I think it's too early to tell exactly what that impact is going to be, but we're going to see more and more stories, headlines generated by AI, and this is happening very, very quickly.
Yeah, I said that was the last question. One more. Tell us about the journalism students. I mean, how do they're learning about how to be a journalist, Northwestern, other schools around the U.S. and maybe across the globe. How do they kind of process all this? I mean, their first job, what is the first job? Is it a local paper? Used to be, or do they start their own thing?
Yeah, it used to be when I came out of journalism school, I won't say what year that was, there was a very linear process of going from smaller organizations to progressively larger organizations, if that was your interest. And that also has been kind of disrupted by all of this change. But the journalism students that I talk to are really they're optimistic about the future because there are new digital sites that are being created, new niche sites and topical sites, new national news organizations, growing up on the digital side, new platforms to present multimedia storytelling. So they're not, I don't think, fearful of the future. I think they're embracing the future. And there are all these new jobs that didn't even exist a few years ago. We have students going into jobs like audience strategy and social media strategy. So the jobs are different than they were when I came out of college, but there are still plenty of jobs out there. And we are seeing the growth of nonprofit and digital news organizations. It's not fast enough to keep pace with the loss, but we are seeing new outlets emerge, and let's hope that continues.
Yeah. Well, Tim, it's great to talk. This is a great conversation, and I think we're going to have you back. Thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to talking with you again very soon.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to be with you.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest curated news on lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to search our archives, check out our latest content? Then visit our website. We're back again tomorrow with another great edition of BRN AM. We'll have a very special guest. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe. Keep on saving. Don't forget, roll with the changes.
Waiting here for you to take and drink of. But if you're tired,
Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the first lifestyle and wellness network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.